Welcome back to Biochemistry Learning on the Go. We're tackling some pretty essential stuff today.
Yeah, for sure. This is going to be a good one.
It's our fourth deep dive now, and we really want to make these tricky biochemistry concepts super clear, you know?
Absolutely. And to make it as practical as possible, we're drawing on our experience teaching this stuff, to college and medical students.
Exactly. So think of this like your own biochemistry tutor walking you through functional groups.
That's right. Functional groups.
They're the key. Yeah, they're like the key to understanding it all.
Yeah, unlocking the mysteries of biomolecules.
Before we get into the specifics, can you give us a big picture view of why functional groups are so important?
Absolutely. Imagine looking at a complex machine like a car engine.
Okay.
All those parts, but you don't really know how they work together, right?
Right.
Well, functional groups, they're like the labels on those parts.
Okay.
They tell you what each component does and how it interacts with the others.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So functional groups are like the instruction manual for building and understanding biomolecules.
Yeah, they give us insights into a molecule's properties, how it behaves in different environments, even how it might interact with other molecules.
All right, so we've got this instruction manual, but to decipher it, we got to understand the basic components.
Right. And when it comes to biomolecules, we're talking organic molecules.
Molecules built around carbon atoms.
Yep.
And carbon is a pretty special element.
Absolutely. Carbon's ability to form four bonds makes it so versatile,
Yeah.
It can create long chains, branch structures, rings, you name it.
Ultimate molecular Lego brick.
Perfect analogy.
So we've got these carbon frameworks. What are they called?
Carbon skeletons.
Carbon skeletons, okay.
The foundation upon which we build all the biomolecules.
But they're not very exciting on their own, are they?
No, not really. They're like a blank canvas,
Okay.
waiting for the artist to add some color and detail.
And that's where the functional groups come in.
That's right.
Ah, so they're like the paintbrushes.
They bring those carbon skeletons to life.
Can you give us a more formal definition of a functional group?
Of course, a functional group is a specific group of atoms attached to a carbon skeleton.
Okay.
And this group, it has characteristic chemical properties that it gives to the entire molecule.
So it's not just the individual atoms, it's how they're arranged together.
Exactly. And these groups are like little modules that we see repeating over and over in different biomolecules.
Oh, cool.
Once you learn to recognize them, you'll see the patterns and you can predict how molecules will behave.
So it's like learning a secret code.
That unlocks the language of biochemistry.
I like that.
I like to tell my students it's like becoming fluent in moleculese.
Moleculese. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start decoding this language. Can you walk us through some of the most common functional groups we'll see?
Absolutely. Let's begin with a category that's all about electrons. Oxidized and reduced groups.
Ooh, electrons. Those tiny little negatively charged particles buzzing around atoms. Okay, so in terms of functional groups, we're interested in how many electrons are associated with a particular carbon atom.
Exactly. Think of it like a tug of war.
Oh,
If a carbon atom is losing electrons, we say it's being oxidized like it's losing its grip on the rope.
and if it's gaining electrons, it's being reduced.
You got it. And as we move from one functional group to another, we can see this shift in electron distribution around that carbon atom.
Okay, so let's start with an example. What's a common functional group that we would say is in a reduced state?
A great example is an alcohol group.
An alcohol group.
Oxygen bonded to a hydrogen and a carbon atom.
Okay.
In this case, the carbon is holding onto its electrons pretty tightly.
So it's winning the electron tug of war.
Exactly. Now, let's move up the oxidation ladder.
Okay.
What happens when we oxidize an alcohol?
I remember from organic chemistry that alcohols can be oxidized to aldehydes or ketones.
You're absolutely right. When we oxidize an alcohol, we remove two hydrogens, one from the oxygen and one from the carbon. And this forms a carbonyl group, which is a carbon double bonded to an oxygen.
So in a carbonyl group, the carbon is sharing more of its electrons with the oxygen.
Exactly. The oxygen is getting a stronger pull in that tug-of-war.
Okay.
And depending on where that carbonyl group is located on the carbon chain, we get either an aldehyde or a ketone.
Okay, I'm starting to see the pattern here. So an alcohol is more reduced than an aldehyde or ketone, but can we go even further up that oxidation ladder?
We can indeed. The most oxidized form of a carbon atom in a functional group is a carboxylic acid.
Carboxylic acids. I remember those from organic chemistry, too. They're kind of acidic.
Yes, and that acidity is directly related to the high level of oxidation of that carbon atom.
Okay.
So in a carboxylic acid, the carbon is bonded to two oxygen atoms, one through a double bond and one through a single bond.
Okay.
The oxygen atoms are really hogging the electrons.
So the carbon is like losing the electron tug of war.
Big time. This makes the hydrogen atom attached to the oxygen very easily lost, which is what gives carboxylic acids their acidic properties.
Wow. So we've gone from a relatively electron-rich carbon in an alcohol to a very electron-poor carbon in a carboxylic acid.
Precisely. And as we'll see, this difference in electron distribution has huge implications for how these functional groups behave and interact with other molecules.
This is fascinating. It's amazing how much information we can get from just a few atoms arranged in different ways.
And this is just the beginning. There's a whole world of functional groups out there, each with its unique personality and contribution to the chemistry of life.
I can't wait to explore more of these molecular building blocks. But I think we need to take a short break to let this information sink in.
Sounds good.
We'll be back in a flash to delve deeper into this amazing world of biochemistry.
All right, see you in a bit. Welcome back. I hope you're ready for more functional group fun. We're just getting started.
I am definitely ready. I'm already starting to see how these functional groups are like a secret code. You know?
Exactly. And the more you understand these groups, the more you'll see this intricate dance of molecules that make life possible.
Okay, so we left off talking about oxidized and reduced groups. What's next on our functional group tour?
Let's move on to a category that's all about charges, charged functional groups.
Ooh, charges.
Yeah, these groups can either donate or accept protons, which are hydrogen ions, H+,
Okay.
giving them a positive or negative charge.
Now, things are getting interesting. I remember from physics that opposite charges attract and like charges repel.
Right.
So these charged functional groups, I bet they play a big role in how molecules interact.
You are absolutely right. Those electrostatic interactions are fundamental to so many biological processes.
I'm already thinking about, how charged functional groups might be involved in things like enzyme activity or how antibodies recognize their targets.
You're on the right track.
Yeah.
But let's break it down step by step first. Let's talk about acidic functional groups.
Okay, acidic groups. I remember from chemistry that acids are substances that can donate protons. So I'm guessing these acidic functional groups have a hydrogen atom that's easily lost.
That's exactly right. Some common examples of acidic functional groups in biomolecules are carboxyl groups, phosphate groups, and sulfate groups.
Okay, let's start with carboxyl groups. Can you remind me what those look like?
Of course. A carboxyl group consists of a carbon atom that's double bonded to an oxygen and also single bonded to another oxygen, which is in turn bonded to a hydrogen atom. So you can think of it as a carbonyl group with an extra OH group attached.
Okay, I see it now. And because oxygen is so electronegative, it's pulling electrons away from that hydrogen atom, making it easier to lose as a proton.
That's a great observation. And when that proton is lost, the carboxyl group becomes negatively charged. We call that a carboxylate ion.
So the carboxylate ion has a negative charge because it's gained an extra electron.
Not quite. Remember, protons are positively charged. So when a carboxyl group loses a proton, it becomes negatively charged because it's lost a positive charge, not because it gained a negative one.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about phosphate groups? They seem to be everywhere in biochemistry.
You are absolutely correct. Phosphate groups are crucial for energy storage and transfer in cells, ATP.
Yeah.
Adenosine triphosphate, the molecule that provides energy for cellular processes. It's got 3 phosphate groups.
Wow, that's a lot of phosphates. Can you remind me what a phosphate group looks like?
A phosphate group has a phosphorus atom bonded to 4 oxygen atoms. One of those oxygen atoms is bonded to a hydrogen atom that's the acidic proton that can be lost.
So when a phosphate group loses a proton, it also becomes negatively charged.
Exactly. And phosphate groups can actually lose up to 3 protons, becoming more and more negatively charged with each proton lost.
Wow, that's pretty versatile.
Yeah.
Now, what about sulfate groups? I don't remember hearing about those as much in biochemistry.
Sulfate groups are important too, though they're not as common as carboxyl and phosphate groups. They have a sulfur atom bonded to 4 oxygen atoms, and one of those oxygen atoms is typically bonded to a hydrogen atom that can be lost as a proton.
So like carboxyl and phosphate groups, sulfate groups can also become negatively charged.
Exactly. And as you might have guessed, these negative charges play a crucial role in how molecules interact with each other.
Okay, so we've covered the acidic functional groups. What about the basic ones?
Basic functional groups are basically the opposite of acidic groups. They like to accept protons, becoming positively charged in the process.
And what are some common examples of basic functional groups?
The most common example is an avenimine group, which consists of a nitrogen atom bonded to two hydrogen atoms.
Ah, nitrogen. I remember that nitrogen has a lone pair of electrons, which makes it a good electron donor.
Exactly. And that lone pair of electrons can grab onto a proton, forming a positively charged ammonium ion.
So amines are like little proton magnets.
That's a great way to think about it. And just like acidic groups, these basic groups play a crucial role in molecular interactions, influencing everything from enzyme activity to drug binding.
This is all starting to make so much sense. Now I'm seeing how these charged functional groups are like little molecular magnets, attracting and repelling each other and driving all sorts of biological processes.
And the beauty of it is that there are only a handful of these functional groups that we need to learn to recognize. Once you master them, you can start to predict how molecules will behave and interact.
It's like learning the alphabet of biochemistry.
Exactly. And just like with letters, we can combine these functional groups in different ways to create an endless diversity of molecules.
This is so fascinating. I can't wait to see how these functional groups come into play when we talk about specific biomolecules like carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids.
And that's exactly where we're headed next. We'll explore how functional groups contribute to the unique properties and functions of each of these major classes of biomolecules.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into the world of biomolecules.
Okay.
I'm ready to dive into the world of biomolecules. Let's see how these functional groups actually work, in the context of real biomolecules.
That's a great question, and it's where things get really exciting. Let's start with carbohydrates, one of the four major classes of biomolecules.
Okay, carbs. Always a hot topic, especially for our students.
Yeah.
They want to understand those nutritional implications.
Absolutely. But beyond their role in, energy storage and metabolism, carbohydrates are really fascinating from a structural standpoint.
So how do functional groups come into play here?
Well, the basic building block of a carbohydrate is a monosaccharide, a simple sugar.
Okay.
And guess what? Those monosaccharides are loaded with functional groups.
I had a feeling you were going to say that.
Exactly. You'll see hydroxyl groups all over these monosaccharides, which makes them very hydrophilic. They love water.
Makes sense considering how easily sugar dissolves in water.
Precisely. And another key functional group in monosaccharides is that carbonyl group.
Oh, yeah.
Which can be either an aldehyde or a ketone.
Back to oxidation and reduction.
Exactly. And this distinction is important because it helps us classify monosaccharides as either aldoses or ketoses.
So glucose, that's a 6-carbon sugar with an aldehyde group that makes it an aldohexose.
You got it. And fructose, which is also a 6-carbon sugar but with a ketone group, is a ketohexose.
Okay, I'm starting to see how we can use functional groups to categorize different sugars.
And that's just the beginning. Remember how we talked about isomers?
Oh yeah, isomers. Those always give my students a headache.
Molecules with the same chemical formula but different arrangements of atoms.
Right.
Well, monosaccharides are masters of isomerism. And the arrangement of their functional groups plays a big role in determining their different properties.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. Let's take glucose again. The position of that hydroxyl group on the carbon atom, that's second from the bottom, determines whether it's a D-glucose or an L-glucose.
So even though they have the same chemical formula, D-glucose and L-glucose are mirror images.
Exactly. It's like they're looking at themselves in a mirror. And this handedness is important because it influences how these sugars interact with enzymes and other molecules.
Wow, that's incredible. So even tiny changes in the arrangement of functional groups can have a big impact.
Absolutely. And as we move on to more complex carbohydrates like disaccharides and polysaccharides, we see how those functional groups continue to play a crucial role in their structure and function.
This has been an awesome deep dive. I feel like I've finally cracked the code to understanding biomolecules.
And that's what it's all about, empowering you with the knowledge to see the molecular world in all its beauty and complexity.
To all our listeners out there, we hope you found this exploration as enlightening as we did in Bull. Remember, functional groups are the key to unlocking the secrets of biochemistry. Once you learn to recognize them, you'll start to see the patterns and connections that make life possible.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep that biochemical curiosity alive.
Thanks for joining us on BiochemSerye Learning on the Go. Until next time, keep those neurons firing.